Okay, welcome everybody to the first ISME Cafe of 2024. I am Sandra Oberoi, chair of the ISME Advocacy Standing Committee, and it's really my joy to welcome everybody in this room, this wonderful ISME Cafe. Each meeting is usually hosted by a different member of one of the ISME committees and special interest groups. And the main purpose of our meetings is to provide a platform for music education practitioners and students across the globe to share, discuss, and reflect on their experiences and narratives while learning from each other, connecting with each other, and sharing with each other in an atmosphere of safety, trust, and mutual support. Just before we actually dive into the whole session, there are a couple of things that I'd love for you all to know, for all of us to know actually. Through the cafe, we aim at creating a welcoming and inclusive environment. We accept and honor diverse perspectives. We cultivate a sense of belonging and trust. We cultivate open and honest communication. We foster the health and well-being of all participants. We listen, respond, and disagree respectfully and avoid judgmental statements towards others. And with that, I'd like to hand over to our host from the Research Commission, ISME Research Commission. She's the co-chair of the Research Commission. Julia Brooks is here. Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Sandra, for those introductions. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this ISME Cafe. So my name is Julia Brook, and I'm here to host us as we hear some insights about early childhood music and development from the editors and authors of the new Oxford Handbook of the same title. So I will introduce probably 4 people that you are all very familiar with. Doctors Margaret Barrett, Graham Welch, Katie Zhukoff, and Vicky Abad, and they will share with us some of their insights from putting this book together. So I think I'll turn it over to Margaret, whoever's speaking first. So thank you very much. We're really excited, and I guess I will also say congratulations on this labor of perseverance and this really important contribution to the literature. So we're really, really excited to hear your insights about this new contribution. So over to you.
Thank you, Julia and Sandra, and my colleagues, Vicky, Katie, and Graham. I actually put my hands on the handbook around 11 p.m. last night when I got home to Tasmania. So my first sighting of the monster, and it was wonderful to see. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the lands from which I'm joining you today. That is the Palawa people of Lutruwita, also known as Tasmania. And I acknowledge elders past and present, and respectfully acknowledge that story, song, dance, culture have been made and continued on these lands. We're here today to share with you what truly has been a labor of love. And I'm just going to share a screen so that you are able, there we go. Right. So we do have the 4 presenters here, and what we intend to do in these 20 minutes is give you a little bit of the backstory to the handbook, and to give some insights from authors, from section editors, and then from Graham and myself as editors. This actually started 10 years ago, Graham, more than 10 years ago, when we wrote an application to the Australian Research Council Discovery Scheme, which we were successful in gaining, on the topic of being and becoming musical, with a focus very much in early childhood. And the program of research had a range of different foci. One was looking at music in family and Another range was looking at music in early learning programs. Another strand of the project analysed data from the longitudinal study of Australian children. And so on the screen there, you see some of those strands and some of the publications that emerge from that. So informal music engagement and learning. At the age of 3, we found from a study of the data from the longitudinal study of Australian children brought forward positive outcomes for children at the age of 5. And I think Vicky's going to talk a little bit more about that particular finding. We also looked at the uses of non-formal music engagement, so what I term invented song in young children's lives, and the role that plays in children's identity work, in culture, and so on. We also looked at music early learning programs, usually those mother or parent and carer and infant programs for children aged between birth and roughly age 5. What happened in those programs, what the life and learning outcomes for parents and carers were there. And that is going to be another focus of Vicky's presentation. And Katie will also talk about another project that has informed this whole program of research, in which we were looking at the implementation of a music mentoring program in schools and communities, and the ways in which these were upskilling teachers and what the learning outcomes for children were in those programs. So I'll try and move this forward, but it doesn't seem to want to. There we are. So that, for any of you contemplating writing a handbook, should that be lurking in the back of your mind, this gives you a little bit of an idea of what happened. At the time that the whole thing began, I was based at the University of Queensland, which provided some funding to bring the section editors to Brisbane for a planning meeting in early 2018, bringing Laurie Custodero and Patricia Sheehan Campbell in from the States, Graham in from the UK, various colleagues from around Australia, Helen Schumark in from the States also. So we had a wonderful and fulfilling week in which we thrashed out what we wanted to commission in terms of chapters into these sections. There was a very large hiccup, which is a COVID-shaped hiccup that you can see there, where in 2021 in July, we submitted the full manuscript to OUP and it sat on a shelf for an entire year. But at the end of that, fortunately, we went into production and it has been published officially on 2024, though some of the documents note that it's 2023. Here you see the 6 sections with the 7th final chapter within it. And it was interesting putting this slide together, Graham, as I thought about what this tells us around the changes that we see in how we investigate young children's music learning and development. So if you look there, Perspectives on Music Development, edited by Mary Broughton and Eugenia Costa-Giomi, 7 chapters. 13 chapters brought together by Laurie and Patricia in music and family contexts. 9 chapters around young children in sites of transition, trauma, and conflict. A further 12 chapters that are looking at music in health settings and looking at the ways in which music is used to address social and medical risk in childhood. And then a further 10 chapters about musical development and neurodiversity. And it has prompted me to think about the ways in which research in early childhood learning and development has moved out of the laboratory and into the real world. And then from understanding that, thinking how very complex that real world is, not just culturally complex. So as you will see in the section that Patricia and Laurie brought together, there are chapters from every continent, or except Antarctica. But anyhow, there are chapters from just about every continent. that demonstrate the really diverse ways that families and communities work in music. 9 chapters in sites of transition, trauma, and conflict. And I recall Graham and I wrote the introduction 3 times. The first time in 2020, when we thought COVID was the biggest risk. And since then, we have seen conflicts in Ukraine and now in Gaza. And these are conflicts in which young children are some of the, they are the most vulnerable victims there. And when you look at the UN data on the number of children who've been displaced in the world, it is a distressingly large figure. It also demonstrates the way in which we've begun, I think, to think about music very much as a resource for health and well-being, as you can see in sections 5 and 6. So there's a lot there for you to dive into, should you be interested. And I'm now going to hand over to Vicky. You're on mute, Vicky.
Okay, I'm now showing you the book and telling you that it's very exciting to have it in print. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. I'm going to share a little bit of a personal journey with you and how I got involved in the project, and I'm sharing it with you from Turrbal country here in Brisbane, where I acknowledge our elders and who are past, present and emerging as the storytellers and the lovers of music, really. So the picture that you can see of a little tiny baby is my daughter, and I think a lot of this started with her because when I became her mother, I experienced music differently to the ways that I had experienced it personally as a child, but also as a professional. So my background is music therapy. I've been working as a music therapist since 1994. And at the time of the ARC grant coming together, I was working at UQ, coordinating the music therapy masters and lecturing into it. And I had a young little person at home. So previous to having the little person, I had worked for the Australian government running programs where we used music to bring together families that were really vulnerable, and found it extremely effective because music was something that didn't threaten people, it was a soft door entry point. And the results were remarkable. In fact, that program's still running 22 years later as a fully funded federal program here in Australia. So I crossed over from being the person who provided music to the parents to being a parent who wanted to go to music. And I took my little one to a couple of programs, and they didn't really do the things that I was hoping to do. They didn't address that beautiful innate musicality that exists between a mum and a bubba, if there's that really healthy connection. And that's what I wanted for her. So I ended up starting my own groups, which is the middle program. My husband bought her, obviously, because I was playing. And then a lot of people came along, and it started a series of questions in my head going, well, why are these people coming? Why are they asking me questions on how to use music in the home? I thought, having had the experience growing up where music was very much a part of everything we did as children, and in my family, that this was something people just knew. My previous job, I was given reasons for why people might not know. And it really started to interest me, but also bother me that people didn't realise that as the parent, they were the ones that were the most important first teacher to their child, and I suppose, gatekeeper of these musical experiences. And also that they are hardwired to sing to their children, and the children are born ready to hear. So I was having a chat to Margaret one day at work, as you do, and mentioned to her that I really don't understand why everyone's coming to music when music is something they can do, and I'm happy to help them, but it really perplexes me and I'd love to know more. And Margaret said, well, that's great, because I've got this great idea and I need people to come along and join me on a research project so we can answer some of those questions. So that's how I got involved with the ARC program, and that then became my PhD. And I took the strand looking at the music early learning programs, and you can see the third picture there is a much younger me with black hair instead of naturally highlighted hair, working with the little people. And still, I still do that. We still run a business that looks at music early learning, music therapy, and music education. What was really interesting about my journey into the ARC was that while my questions were answered, why were people coming to these groups? In a nutshell, they were coming because not everyone had experiences of musical childhoods, and they hadn't had the experience of great music education in some of the schooling. So they now knew that music was really important to child development because of all of the research we're seeing around neurology and brain development and music, which you all know about. But they didn't feel confident to do these things, which we know parents have been doing since literally time began. But at the same time, it opened up even more questions. So I left this PhD with more questions than I started it with. And that's why I now continue this lifelong research journey with Margaret and Graham, looking always to see how can we better help or provide resources to parents so they take music into their homes. Because we know from the research Margaret talked about, and you can see that in some of the articles published, that when music is shared in the home most days, the children's pro-social and cognitive skills are significantly improved. And that's just from sharing music. We weren't able to tell what kind of music because of the way the data was collected. But I think that's such a powerful piece of information for us to present back to governments. And it's a major resilience booster for families. So a few little reflections on being a section editor. This was really interesting. I contributed to quite a few chapters in the handbook, mostly from the PhD. As you can see, I've outlined some of them here for you. But I didn't contribute to the chapter or the section of which I would traditionally work, which was music and health. As a music therapist, that's where I would have worked traditionally. But in recent years, as I just said, I've been working in music early learning, and I've been looking at ways of researching. I think I saw an opportunity to expand the ways I can help people by providing research that allowed parents to bring music back into the home. So really empowering the parent to rediscover their own musical child. So I think my experience as a music therapist and my years of working in community music therapy and pediatric music therapy put me in good stead to section edit here, because I then had the experience of music early learning. And it was a great honour to do this with my co-editor, colleague and friend Helen Schumer. We've both worked extensively in these fields, and it was quite funny because when I graduated as a music therapist in 1994, Helen was the president of the Australian Music Therapy Association. And I remember we had a ceremony back then, and you get your certificate. It was all very special. And Helen handed me the certificate, and I remember thinking, I want to be just like her when I grow up. And here we were editing a book chapter or section together. So it was a lovely way of acknowledging her role in my career as a mentor, but also how far my profession has come and the ways that music therapy and music and health in general is being recognised. I think creating a section in the handbook that focused on music, musicians and music therapists and their shared roles in addressing medical and social needs for children also allowed us to really deeply dive into the areas that may have been contested in the past, but really we all need to work together to do what we all want to do, which is to address the needs of children, particularly vulnerable children, as Margaret pointed out. So that's my little share today of a bit of a personal reflection and some reflections on being involved as a section editor.
Great. Thanks, Vicky. And over to Katie.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to introduce to you Chapter 6 in this wonderful new handbook, Windows on Children's Perspectives on Music in Their Lives, Visual Methods in Music Education Research, that Margaret and I co-wrote together. Now, we all know that over the last 20 or so years, the whole research with young children has become much more participatory, that it's involving children as active contributors to research, listening to children's voices, valuing their opinions. And very often this kind of research involves some sort of visual artifacts or prompts, such as drawing or photography. And Margaret had developed draw and tell technique some years earlier and used it with 5 to 7 year olds. to elicit their perspectives on meaning, value, and use of arts in their lives. And in this study, we pretty much utilize a very similar approach to listen to children's opinions about music in their lives. So the study was part of a national music teacher mentoring program. This program began in Australia in 2015, and with quite a bit of funding from the federal government and some state governments. The approach was to pair a music specialist with a classroom music teacher who had no background in music, no training in music, pretty much did not do any music activities in their classroom, and work together as partners to develop music activities that were pretty much suited to the local conditions. So what were the resources of the school? What was the student needs, particular needs of that classroom? And what did teacher want to achieve? So very individual tailored programs. And part of the evaluation of this program was interviewing teachers, classroom teachers, their music mentors, school principals, and also children. We wanted to know whether the program, how well was the program received by children. So we went to 8 different schools. Some of them were in the cities and some were in the regions, across a whole range of socioeconomic index. So some quite well-off schools, some very not well-off schools. And we interviewed children in small focus groups of 4 to 5 children. We felt that that was less scary than having one-to-one interview with a stranger that came to a school. And so we ended up speaking to 74 children altogether. And one of the things we did is ask children to draw a picture of their favorite activity in music, talk about that, and of course we asked them our specific research questions. So if you read the book, you'll see quite a few illustrations of children's drawings and lots of quotes from them as well. So what were our main findings? Well, children did value music. They very much enjoyed the new music activities in their classroom, and they recognized the intrinsic value of music and the impact that music education was having on the socioeconomic aspects of their lives. How did they use music? Well, the children have told us that their favorite activities in music were dancing, singing, and playing musical games. Children had access to music at school as well as at home. So at home, they made music with members of their extended family. They listened to music in the car or on the radio or TV. They reported being exposed to quite a variety of musical instruments at school and at home. And typically for the Australian context, many children access their music using a wide range of devices. So participating in musical activities made children very happy and excited and cheered them up when they were feeling depressed. So a really positive effect on children's mood and emotion. At the same time, it was helpful for self-regulation. So children found music activity relaxing, calming for some children. Other children saw it as a time away from the rest of the world. Which is kind of the opposite side of social activity, because singing with others was very much a social activity that built children's self-confidence. Many of them reported loving singing with their peers at school or family members and receiving a positive feedback from adults about their voices. What was quite surprising is that even very young children, and these were children from kindergarten to year 2, they recognized that having music activities in the classroom had a positive impact on the development of their literacy and numeracy skills. So overall, we would say that introduction of music activities into the classrooms with teachers who were not musically trained, simply through help from their music mentors, that all had a very positive impact and strong impact on schooling, as well as well-being of young children. but also the draw and tell research method is really particularly useful when you're working with young children in school settings. You can pretty much research any topic you would like, and if you ask children to draw something about it, they will tell you a lot more than if you simply ask them some questions. Thank you.
About 5 more minutes.
And it's time for Graham.
To myself. There we are. Well, well done, colleagues. I think that's given a real kind of flavour of what the handbook is about. Essentially, the handbook is a collaborative activity. And through that collaboration, you can see that there's been a lot of within discipline, but also interdisciplinary activity. And nevertheless, in terms of what's the future, well, if we look at what we're doing now, what we ought to be doing, there is a need for continuing research into young children's musical behaviour and development. So first of all, in terms of behaviour and development in music, I mean, what counts as music? You know, what counts as children's musicality? One of the great challenges that we have as researchers is that the outside world assumes that music is some kind of black box, you know, that you do music and things happen. And there's no sense of that kind of critical perspective. But yet what counts as music and what counts as an adult perspective of music may not be quite the same as music for a young child, particularly as I think that music is a part of a child's world of sound. And the whole sound thing is much more overlapping and holistic, which we as adults tease out this thing called music. But I think our evidence so far is that children, particularly young children, are likely to experience a world of sound, of which some sound is more organized in particular ways that we as adults call music. But as we move around the world, we know that there are many different musics, there are many different tuning systems. So one person's music may not be the same as someone else's. And then I've given you also just below that, what counts as musical behavior and development through music. There's lots of interest in the so-called kind of wider benefits of music, but we still don't really know enough about this, particularly with young children, because as Katie was saying, that our research tools sometimes can be a little bit blunt in terms of how we actually access what's going on with these children and whether they're on their own or whether they're in a small group. And the fact that they might be doing things quite momentarily as they move around in whatever the geographical spaces that they are. So that's just a group of things there, but also a reminder perhaps to us that we need to continue working in an interdisciplinary way. We need to work as teams to solve this. Lone researchers are wonderful, all right? And my hat's off, you know, to all of those people that are able to be individual researchers. My own professional experience over the years, and probably that of my colleagues here this evening, is that when you work with other people, you get so much more because your eyes are kind of opened up as to what might be possible. So Margaret, we'll do the last slide, shall we? So part of that then is we need a deeper understanding of the places where children make and experience music. So here I've just given you a couple of images. On the left side, here you've got a young Asian child making music with dad and learning in that kind of home situation, in that lovely kind of nurturing environment, and just growing up in making and experiencing music. And at the bottom there is just one of the shopping centres, an enormous shopping centre at Stratford, near where the 2012 Olympics took place, where I have to go through this station on my way to work. And I occasionally will have some reason perhaps to stop off and wander around this shopping centre. Recently, because I was on my way to a little Catholic school in nearby. But if you walk through this centre, there's music all the time. And as you walk in and out of a shop, you're going to hear different musics. So if you're a child in a pushchair or a toddler, for example, you're experiencing a whole variety of different musics with your carer, with mum or dad or whatever. And these are other than conscious. These are all part of that informal musical saturation, which we just need to tease out a little bit more and make sense of. And in that, the kind of lozenge image is just some of the ways in which we might be accessing music. And then we realize then that we do have this culture for children produced by us as adults. So it's quite difficult to buy a toy these days that doesn't make a noise, I discovered. Or culture with children in which we actually work with them. But what about the culture by children? Do we spend enough time in that? And that's one of the things that Margaret's been a pioneer of in terms of research, is how we actually just observe children on their own in the places that they explore sound and make sound. And for me, my last comment is that one of the joys of being involved in this project is that it's reminded me just how exciting it is to work with these young humans and the way that they just open my eyes to what the world really is like, as opposed to all this other nonsense which surrounds us. So many congratulations to all of our authors, and especially for Margaret with her whip and her carrot to keep us all going. So that's my bit.
Thank you, Graham. Also the wielder of a whip and carrot occasionally. So there you are. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you enjoy that handbook. Thank you, Katie and Vicky, for your presentations this morning, and to all of the editors, the contributors, the commentaries. One of the unique two things I think that I just want to point out with Graham is that in putting together the teams for this, we were conscious of ensuring that emerging researchers were part of it. So when you look through the handbook, you will see a lot of early career and emerging researchers in there. And we very much wanted to promote that. And another element is that in each of those sections, we also commissioned a section commentator, somebody who sat back and read the 13 chapters or 10 chapters or 6 chapters or whatever, and then wrote a commentary, an essay. And there is some really beautiful work there that teases out themes that we may not have thought out before in the ways in which those sections come together. So thank you, everyone. Look forward to chatting in the rooms shortly.
Great. Thank you, Graham and Margaret and Katie and Vicky. That was a really interesting overview. It's nice to get kind of a behind the scenes look at how the handbook came together. I believe we do have a few minutes for some whole group questions. Is that right, Sandra? I'm going to say yes.
That's correct. Yes.
Yes. So we
Any
probably have about
questions?
10 or 15 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions for any of our authors about anything related to the handbook or research with early childhood, we would love to hear some of your questions. And then just to give you a preview of what's next, we'll have a bit of a break so we can rest our eyes and get some coffee or beverage wherever you're at in the world. And then we'll come back and have breakout sessions. So we'll be in smaller groups to discuss this as well. So if you have a question, please raise your hand or put it in the chat, and then we'll get someone to address it.
Or you could put something in the chat.
Yeah. I'll ask a question then. I wanted to know, I thought it was interesting when you said, Margaret, how much focus music has on health and well-being and that shift. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that, if you feel that where we're at in the literature around that, or if there'll be a new emphasis as we think about vulnerabilities or different aspects as we develop the interdisciplinary nature of with this population.
It's interesting. I see a range of different shifts, and Graham, I'm sure we'll have a perspective on this as well. But perhaps a move from thinking of music in a medicalized model as a diet supplement or a pill or something targeted at a specific condition, to thinking about music being part of being human, part of well-being, that it is not a full life if you are not engaged in music in some way. And what I've wanted in all of my work to break down is the idea that music is something, because it's so special, that only very special people can do it. That it's this little black box over here for the very, very special people. And you only go out public with your music making if you can do it really, really well to some sort of incredible international standard. Whereas my view of music is we are all musical, and we should engage in sharing music with each other. And it doesn't always have to be the best performance, because the reason for sharing music with each other may not be to create the best performance of a work, but maybe that very essence of being together in sound, in movement, in companionship. And that is the richness of music in sustaining health, well-being, and creating a more cohesive or a society in which we can engage in nuanced understanding of each other. Graham, you've probably got another thought on that as well.
Well, I think as you said, the social model of disability is rather more kind of generous, in that it just suggests that we are rather diverse as a race, as a group of humans, and that what is one person's normal is someone else's slightly different. And what's important in all of the things that have come across in this work that got collated into this handbook is that there is an enormous diversity in whatever counts as normal or so-called neurotypical. And we don't necessarily need to see people as deficit. Nevertheless, what we have to do is we have to recognize, as Margaret said, that we are all musical by design, but that our potential is not necessarily being met either in music or through music. And when we look at disadvantaged communities, we look at families and children and young people, if you like, on what one might consider to be the margins of society, particularly because of COVID. I mean, in England, we've got children enter school at the age of 5, and we have a significant proportion of those 5-year-olds who have speech, language, and communication difficulties, up to 40% in some classes of 5-year-olds. We have some children now which are mute; they're not speaking. And during COVID, they've just been sat at home with some kind of technology sat in front of them. They haven't had people talking to them. There's no sense of communal and communication engagement. And so to think of what counts as health and well-being are really important. And for me, I think that the whole business of of working in sound and exploring sound is something that we need to deepen, but we also need to join up. We're seeing lots of social prescribing of music for older people, people of my tender age, God forbid, who are being encouraged to engage with the arts because it's good for their mental health, it's good for them physically, it's et cetera, et cetera. We also find that the older people that have had some kind of neurological problem, such as a stroke, that one of the ways back to walking and moving is through rhythm, is through dance steps. And yet when we look at young children and we say, how are we going to teach these 4 and 5-year-olds about pulse? We start walking it, and we start walking it as a group, you know. So I think there are things, not, although this book is about young children and early childhood, in fact, it's about humanity. It's about everybody. And I think the answer, long answer, winded answer to your question, Julia, is that we should be looking across the lifespan. We should be researching across the lifespan. And you and I know that the Research Commission, in all of its many, many years and decades, we get relatively few submissions that relate to people in middle age or older people. And we get relatively few submissions to do with very young children. So we're not, you know, there's a lot of work to do to embracing the lifespan.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the short answer, Margaret.
Short answer. Also, a big shout out to Lauren Kustera, who's the chair of the ISME, the Early Childhood Music Education group as well, which does great work in this. Yeah, I'll save it for the breakout room. We have another question from another Julia. This is Lisa Coop's 12-year-old Julia, and she asks, what did the authors learn about how children define what is music? Good question, Julia. Thanks for thinking of a question for us.
Great question, Julia. I'll jump in first. I find that children, you know, very young children are very, what I term, open-eared. And when you listen to their own music making, it is incredibly diverse. And perhaps as we get older and develop preferences, we might get what I call hardening of the categories rather than hardening of the arteries. So hardening of the categories as we move towards preferences. But at the same time, I see these, you know, not as mutually exclusive. We all in our tastes and preferences in music range across all sorts of musical genres. And I hope that we are able to be open enough to consider music in multiple ways, to consider sound as music in multiple ways, rather than coming to very small answers. I'm thinking, Katie, from the research that we had in the National Music Teacher Mentoring Program, there were really diverse views from children, even within that, of what constituted music.
Unmute myself. Yes, I want to jump in and say that when I did talk to children, playing an instrument came much, much lower down the list of what they talked about as music. And yet us adults think, you know, starting piano lessons or whatever it is, violin lessons, teaching instrumental playing, this is doing music. So those children are very much talking about playing musical games, which would be movement and singing and clapping rhythms and chasing each other, doing things like that. That was music. Singing, of course, using your voice, which is much more natural and easy, and not worrying about how beautiful or in tune it sounds, just simply letting the voice come out. That was very much up there. Yes, you know, some children had exposure to instruments and they were starting to learn them, but that was not their priority. And I think also interacting with devices, which of course is a double-edged sword these days, could be, you know, great, could be not so great, all sorts of things. Parents are worried about children's exposure in online, but musical apps are just huge. They're growing all the time. A student can have karaoke through apps. They don't have to have a karaoke machine anymore, or it's even part of various games they play. So singing through that has also happened. And I think also we need to be aware of the genre. You know, classical music is not what children encounter first up. Yes, in primary school, there will be nursery rhymes and simple melodies and things like that. But by the time they're 7, they're much more exposed to popular music and what's around them, and they'll be singing you know, Taylor Swift songs and whatever. So we need to jump on board with that and embrace that, and not just kind of stick to a very narrow genre of music that we expose children to or we consider to be music.
Yeah, and of course, with very young children, they may not have the language to talk about it or use this word, Julia, of define. So the only way we can make sense of how they make sense of it is just by observing them. So recently I was in a nursery class with 3 and 4-year-olds in a local primary school. And as I walked in, the children were engaged in lots and lots of sound activities. 2 children were playing the radiator with some pencils. Another boy had a doll that he was actually singing a lullaby to. The 2 others were making quite metric, rhythmic sounds while they were on the floor, on the carpet, moving cars. And these were just examples of the children engaging with structured sound that you and I would probably call music, but they were just just engaged both intellectually and emotionally with the sound world.
I work with the bubbies, the little tiny people, and toddlers mostly, and that's also the area I research. And I really love your question. What we see and what the children teach their parents is that music is a whole body experience. They don't make music with an instrument. Their body is their instrument. And it's really beautiful to watch children, especially the babies. They won't necessarily sing to music, but they move their entire body. They sit there and bop up and down, and they then teach their parent. And it's an absolutely beautiful thing to watch a parent fall in love with their child through their musical interactions that are very physical, very visceral, as well as what we would traditionally call musical.
Good question. Good answers. Well, I see it is like 10 minutes to the hour. So I would suggest maybe we take a bit of a small break, and I'll keep my camera on, but feel free to like step away for a bit, and we'll come back at the top of the hour for more discussion in breakout rooms. Summary spot, just to give us a quick summary or a summary of some of the key things that you guys talked about in your breakout rooms. And then I think I'll throw it back to Sandra to close us off, and then we can continue on our days or evenings. So that's the next steps.
Well, my colleagues can tell you what they spoke about, but I think in essence we were each relating about music in our own experience in our own lives, and the way that we kind of make sense of it with the different groups that we meet, whether this is young people or whether this is intending teachers or older people. So it was an interesting discussion of music across the lifespan.
Cool. Very nice. Great. For those just joining us, we're just getting a bit of a summary from each of the breakout rooms, and then we'll have some closing thoughts. So the next report is Katie. Katie.
We had quite wide-ranging discussions about all sorts of topics. So one was about how do you research in people's homes? So I just passed on the information that Vicky was doing in her research in terms of how do you collect data and you protect your participants' privacy, but you get interesting data about that. Another question was about how do we do interdisciplinary research in music. So we talked about sort of different conceptions that for research, it was bringing all the other things from psychology, from health, from all social research into music. And yet in other people's minds, it's more about cross-curricular things, just bringing science into music. So try to sort of see how these things differ from a pedagogical perspective or research perspective. And the surprise one, we talked about music performance anxiety. Somebody who's doing PhD of vocalists who are teenagers and things like that. So I've added my bit about music performance anxiety. That's also been a topic of interest to me, and different things that you could do in that area. So it was great to hear about what other people were doing and learn from that.
Great. Margaret, how was your room?
Oh, great room. Actually, a lot of our discussion was about methodology and working with young children, particularly how to elicit young children's perspectives when they are pre-verbal, or how to work with them ethically when they are unable to give their consent, and you are relying on parental consent as part of that. We also talked a lot about the use of cameras in research and whether cameras prompt our research participants to be more performative, and the ways in which we oh, excuse me, somebody else take over. I'm about to go off.
Okay. Vicky.
Yes, our conversation was quite emotionally quite involved, because we were discussing music in the community, and in that context we were discussing Claudia's experiences at the moment living in Israel, and the experiences of many of the children that she knows personally through family and friends, and also her research, who've had to move and are displaced, and how this has impacted on their education and on obviously their access to music. But at this point in time, their human rights are really what the focus needs to be on. And we were discussing how music plays into that, and how even in these extraordinary and devastating circumstances, children are still singing and they're still connecting to each other and their communities through song. And that led us to discuss the chapters around in the Oxford Handbook that are around music in the community. And I have to say, I felt extremely, extremely blessed and grateful to live in a country where I don't have a border 100 meters away with conflict. So again, Claudia, my personal thoughts with you and your people, and our hope for the entire world to be kind and loving toward each other.
Yes. Echo that, Claudia. It's so nice to see you, and we really are thinking of you where you are. Great. Margaret, I'll turn it back to you for some final thoughts, and then I'll turn it to Sandra to say goodbye to everyone.
Indeed. Final, sorry, I've had a flu that's been going now for 4 weeks, but hopefully I'm at the bitter end of it. So apologies for ducking out then. Just final thoughts. And this is a huge volume. There are 62 chapters. There are, I think, 83 authors. There are contributions from 40-something countries. But it's only, I would say, the beginning of the story. It's not even half of the story. It's a provocation for us to think and act more and better, and to collaborate and to reach out across boundaries and barriers that are sometimes just artificial, sometimes created just out of not knowing, sometimes created out of not feeling you can ask, and I would particularly say for early career researchers, go and ask. Don't hold back. Go meet the people you're reading, meet your reference list and your bibliography, and ask them the hard questions, because that's how we're going to move the profession forward. So thank you, everyone, for being part of this conversation.
Great. Thank you. Also, that's a big shout out to the importance of conferences and cafes like this. So huge thanks to Sandra and Ryan for setting up the cafe. I think it's a really great opportunity for us to meet one another and have these kinds of conversations. So thanks for organizing this. And I hope we can see all of you this summer in Finland for the next ISME conference. So hope to see you soon in person, and thanks for joining us. But I will send the final thank yous to Sandra.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Graham, Margaret, Vicky, and Katie. We really appreciate you taking time off your busy schedule and being here with us, and especially all of you. You make this special. Please don't forget to follow ISME on our social media handles. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, and on Twitter. You will find us if you just type ISME. We also have the advocacy page on Facebook, so give us a follow, and you will see follow-up cafe sessions, many like this and different as well. So please do keep in touch. We want to hear from you. And once again, I'm just going to post the link of the feedback survey that we'd love to hear from you. Just 3 minutes or less of your time. And if you're looking for specific topics that we can address through the advocacy committee, please let us know and we'll plan that for you. Thank you so much for being here with us. Good morning, good night. Have a wonderful day and the rest of the week. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thanks for joining us.